Hi everybody, this is Casey from Upcycled Island, and today I don't know what I'm going to make. What I've done though is taken my shirts, I buy long sleeve shirts and I use the cuffs to make my little mini wallets because I give those as gifts, and then I use the rest of the fabric from the shirt to make clothing or bags or any number of things. And so today I decided it was time, yesterday, I decided it was time to get rid of some of those shirts and use them up. So I don't know what I'm going to use them for, but I've started the prep work. Let me show you what I've done so far. Okie dokie. I've taken shirts in the blue tones. I cut them into 4-inch strips, and then I cut those 4-inch strips into different lengths, just random different lengths. And I did cut some in squares, and the reason I did that is because so many of these shirts are striped. And I was tagging on one of these, and the cross grain didn't give a whole lot, so I thought, well, I'll do some squares, and then I can have some of my piecing when I piece these together with the lines going horizontal instead of vertically. Here's the squares, and when I piece them together, I can piece some of these squares like so, some of them like this, just to give it some interest. I'm going to piece these together into strips, and then I'll piece the strips together and make a big piece of fabric, and then I'm going to decide what I'm going to make. I'm probably going to make a top because that's what I usually do. I'm not going to make a bag out of these strips. So I did a 4-inch strip with the shirt placket. So I can, if I make a top, which is what I'm probably going to do, I'll have the shirt placket to piece in. So I'll have a button-up shirt. I'm going to piece some of this together, and then we'll see what we're going to do. Okay, here's my plan for piecing this together. We're going to start out, and I'm just randomly putting, checks with solids, stripes with stripes, checks with stripes, solids, stripes. And I'm going to start out by just piecing these together, and then I'll piece all of these together. And I'm just randomly pulling out sizes and prints. And I'm clipping them together so I can just take a bunch of them to the machine like this. Now I'm going to serge these. And the reason I'm going to serge these is I don't want a bunch of raw edges. So I'm going to serge these together. Okay, I've done one pair, and I'm not cutting between, so I'm chain piecing. And we come back to the work table, and I'll cut these apart. And so I'm just going to keep doing that. until I get all of this stuff put together. And then we'll start putting these together to make longer strips. All right, I have a big pile of strips that are paired together. And the next step is to press. And you want to press the seam to one side. Since it's a serge seam, you can only go to one side. And so I will just continue to press all of these. I've got all my strips pressed. And so the next thing I'm going to do, and this is only because it's for me, I'm going to top stitch across every one of these seams. Now you don't have to do this, but I'm doing it because a pet peeve of mine is when I'm sewing a bunch of seams like this and then they get twisted. And so what I'm doing right now is I am stacking these so that the seam is pressed to the right. And the reason I'm doing that is because when I take it to the machine to sew, I want to be able to sew the same each time without having to flip the fabric. It's going to all be in the same direction, and that's going to save me some time. And I'm even thinking about making that a feature and top stitching in like maybe a red thread, because there's no red anywhere on here. And I'm also thinking about using maybe a decorative stitch. I'll need to repress that one. Using a decorative stitch or several decorative stitches, several different ones, just to make it fun. Just to make it different. I want to do something different. Okay, to help me make my decision about what I'm going to do about the top stitching, I've taken some scraps while I've just pieced them together. So I did that so I'd have lots of seams to practice on. So I'm going to practice with a straight stitch with red thread. I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. Any decorative stitch I use can't be too dense because then I'd have to use a stabilizer underneath it, and I don't want to use that. I don't want to add any more bulk to the seams than I have to. So it's going to be a pretty open stitch, plain and simple, either a straight stitch or a triple zigzag, something like that, that won't cause a lot of additional bulk. And I'm just going to play. I'm going to use red thread on part of it and white thread on part of it and see what I decide to use. I tried white with a straight stitch, and then I tried white with a triple zigzag stitch. And here it is on darker. And then I tried red with the triple zigzag. And then a red straight stitch. And I like the triple zigzag most. And I chose the triple zigzag because it all goes in one direction. There's no back and forth in the design. It'll go pretty fast, and it covers a bigger area than the straight stitch, and it's going to show up more. And I want this to be a fun, funky little, whatever I make it to be, I think a top. And so I'm going to use the triple zigzag in red. So this is going to add quite a bit of time to my project, but I think it's going to be fun and look good in the long run. I have the machine set up for a triple zigzag with a width of 3 and length of 1. And I'm taking the seam, and the seam is to my right. So I'm putting it under the foot and placing it so I have a little arrow on my foot. So I'm placing it so the seam is still just a little bit to the left of the base of the arrow. And then I lower my presser foot, and I'm just going to sew. I don't have to back stitch because it's a triple zigzag, and it's going to stay in place because the stitches are so close together and they're in a zigzag pattern. So the stitches aren't going to come out, so I don't have to back stitch at the beginning and the end. That's another advantage of using this stitch. So I'm just going to stitch. And I cut it off at my little thread cutter. And here's what she looks like. Easy peasy. Now I have a bunch of those to do it to. I've got my first set of strips together and have the triple zigzag on them in red. And now it's time to make my fabric. And I'm going to do that by, first of all, I want my fabric pieces to be at least 29-30 inches because I am going to make a top for myself. And I've measured my, from my shoulders to my thigh area. I don't wear my shirts that long, but anyway, if I have 30 inches, 29-30 inches in length, I'll have plenty of space lengthwise for my top. So I'll just grab some and put them together, trying not to put two of the same together. I still want it to be random, but this is what we're going to go for. And I'm just going to play. This one's got lots of different things in it. So, first of all, here is one strip. So I need to clip this one. I'm going to sew these together. And then my next strip is going to be this, and I need a shorter one. And so this is kind of interesting. So I'm going to cut this one. And it's actually just puzzling this stuff together. So I'm just going to continue to do that. And I'll sew these strips together and then do the red zigzag. And then eventually I'll sew all of these strips together, these long strips together. And the reason I like doing it this way, the random, is I don't have to worry about matching seams. I'm not very good at it. So I avoid it whenever possible. So I'm just going to fold these over, right sides together, and then sew them up. And then once I've got them sewn up, and I am going to use the serger, then I will use the red zigzag on that seam. just like I did on the short seams. I have my fabric constructed. There's the wrong side. Here is the front of it. I have a 4-inch strip that includes the buttons, and then this, the rest of it. And then I have the other side with the buttonholes here. I've already cut out the back, and now I'm ready to cut out the front. And what I decided to do was to go ahead and button this up. And since it was a man's shirt, this was the top. But now this is going to be the top because a woman's shirt is right over left. Man's shirt is left over right. So right over left, this is going to be the top. I've got it spread out. I'm not going to put it on a fold. What I did was I made a new pattern piece. I have my tracing paper and I cut out 2 and taped them together. So I have one big pattern piece, and all I have to do is line up the center line with the center of the buttons, and we're good. So first of all, I need to center this. So where do I want my pattern to go? It can go anywhere now. I want my button to be about 1 inch down. That'll give seam allowance. So where's my... There's 1 inch. That's about right. So I want to pin this. And I want to keep that centered. So I'm going to put a pin here. And we're going to put one here. And what I'm doing this for is to keep that center line in the center of the buttons, because that's the center of my fabric. And there we are. And now all I have to do is pin the rest of this and cut it out. I will tell you, I am really, really glad I did the extra step of sewing down the seam allowances after I serged them, because when I sewed these long strips together, I didn't have to stop every few stitches and make sure that my seam allowance was going in the right direction. I just zoomed right through it. I've got my front cut out, and I'm just going to flip it over. I used that pattern piece that I made to cut out the front, and then I'm just going to use the original pattern piece to mark my darts. I have my fabric pieced together for my sleeves, and I did something a little different with this in that I only pieced in one place. I made them the same, and when I turn them over right sides together, when I cut out my sleeves, then my sleeves will be mirrored of each other. And again, I will reiterate how very glad I am that I used the top stitching on these seam allowances, because not only is it easier when I sew the long seams, but when I sew the garment together, when you cut through a serge seam, some of it will come loose at the very edges, and that's not going to happen because I've top stitched them with that triple zigzag. And so when I go to sew my garment together, I won't have to deal with that coming apart business. So I have my sleeve pattern, and I'm going to just position it so that the center of the sleeve will be in this center section. I have my sleeves cut out, and as you see, they do mirror each other. And I am glad that I thought of that. I think that'll be a cool touch. The only thing I have left is to cut out my neck facings. And my back neck facing was designed to be cut on the fold, and I did that. My front neck facing is also designed to cut on the fold, but I'm not going to be able to do that because I have that button placket. And so I'm going to need some extra fabric on the front so I can, fold it over where that button placket is. So I'm going to allow myself quite a bit because I don't know really how much I need. So I'm just going to, here's the fold. I'm going to move this up so it is positioned as if it would be on the fold. And I'm going to have all of this extra. And then when I get it on, I'll know how much of this to trim off when I start putting it together. Better to have too much than too little. I have everything cut out, and I have some leftover fabric that I constructed, and some of the pieces are small, but some of them are pretty good size. So with these, we're not going to waste it. I can make cosmetic bags, little zip bags out of those. And these smaller pieces I can use to cut out hearts and stars and other shapes and use that for applique pieces. So this isn't going to waste. Most of it will be used in other projects. I'm going to construct my garment and then show you the end result. And I will just go over some things that I did to accommodate the changes I made to the pattern. Okay, here's the one thing I wanted to show you because I altered the shirt to have the front buttons, and I cut extra on the front neck facing, and this is why. And so what I'm gonna do, this is the front neck facing, and I cut all this extra because I wasn't sure how much I was gonna need. So I've got it pinned on, and I'm just gonna pin it so it folds over at the edge. And then I know how much to cut off. Well, she's done. This is her. I especially like the way my sleeves match. And I wanted to show you, this was a pattern that had no front seam. And I showed you how I adjusted it so I could use the button and buttonhole plackets. And I used the pattern's neck facing. It's just a regular neck facing. And we added that extra on the end so we could fold it over. And then my buttonhole on this, the buttonhole, the facing would have covered it up. So all I did was fold it at an angle so it wouldn't obstruct the buttonhole and just tack that down. That was an easy fix. And I'm very pleased with it. Be sure and subscribe, like, and share this video, and hit the subscribe button. Check out my Etsy shop, upcycledisland.etsy.com. And thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you make a garment using the patchwork technique I showed you, post a picture of it in the comments. I'd love to see what you do. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Stay safe.